But yeah, that always cracks me up. He always jokes about that.
How do we know when the people are on? Will it show up on a different screen that we're seeing who's logged in, or and the participants, I guess?
Yeah, so you can see a couple people just jumped on.
Oh, there we go. Okay,
for folks that are just joining on, thanks for joining us this morning or afternoon, wherever you are. We're going to wait till about 2 minutes past the top of the hour, and then we'll get started. For those of you that just joined us, we're going to start 2 minutes past the top of the hour just to give a few more people the opportunity to join, and then we'll kick off. One more minute, everybody, and we'll kick off and get going here.
Thank you, Ben.
All right, everybody, we'll kick off. First, just want to thank you for taking a few moments out of your day to spend some time with us on these webinars. These webinars are very occasional for us, and we try to do them as much as possible, and you'll see us increasingly doing them. So very much appreciate you joining on and having some time with Michael and myself. My name is Ben Sampson. I run product here at Outsell and also host our Outsell podcast. So you may have heard me before on past webinars, as well as on our podcast show. So I like to ask a lot of fun questions, and Michael is most definitely going to be getting all those questions. Before I introduce Michael, a few housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, so if you have to jump out midway through, or if you have team members that you think would benefit from this, we will be sending you the video, so you can most certainly watch and review this afterwards. We more than likely will also produce this as a podcast, so you can listen to it as well. Again, share it with your team. You'll find in the toolbar on the webinar that there's a Q&A function. Please feel free to post questions throughout the webinar. We will answer most of those questions at the end of the webinar, but we'll do our best in the time that we have to get to your questions. Michael and I will talk for about 35 to 40 minutes. We'll make sure we have enough time to open it up for Q&A. And I want to take a moment just to introduce Michael Dziekan. He's our VP and practice lead here. I like to say Michael's our in-house technologist, thinking about the future of tech, AI, blockchain, machine learning, all those things. And so just makes for a really good conversation, especially if you have a bottle of wine on the table with you. And Michael, I'm looking at you. You look like you just finished a summit of Everest, so you must be back in Ottawa. So welcome to joining me on the show here. So if you'd like, maybe just give a few moments and introduce yourself, and I'll kick us off here.
Yeah, well, first, thanks, Ben. And first, the reason I'm wearing this very heavy North Face jacket. Here in Ottawa, I started the morning off, beautiful bright day, walked outside, minus 20, nice and crisp, normal standard day in February, March timeframes here in Ottawa. But yeah, great to be joining you today from Ottawa. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. And I thought it was appropriate to actually start by wearing my jacket today, because this is not your normal, let's say, business attire. But I think it's really fitting to our topic today, because this is not about business as usual. This is about a real different dynamic that's occurring around us in the market. So everybody should have their North Face jackets on. I will take it off, though, because I'll be really hot and sweating very quickly here, Ben.
Great. Well, today we're talking about the Outsell Growth Framework. It's a piece that our team published at the start of January to kick off the year, and it's definitely a backbone of a lot of the research that our company is doing throughout the year. And I guess a good question, Michael, you leading this research, is why we did this research in the first place. I mean, there's a lot going on. We've had a lot of demand, and we've had some past work that we've done to get us to this point, but we very much needed this piece. So maybe a good question is just why we did this research even to start with and what it represents.
Sure, thanks, Ben. Yeah, let me give you some of the principles to the what, the why, and the how here to this important piece of work that we're sharing with you. And I like to start with the why, of course, to understand the rationale to, again, non-business as usual. What we've been noticing, as you pointed out, Ben, over the years here, we've seen a continual change in the structural dynamics of the data economy. And over the last 3 to 5 years, there's been a significant increase in the overall quantity and velocity of data, how it's being bought and sold. Really profound implications, frankly, in terms of the way that data assets are not only being bought and sold, but utilized today. And what does it mean to a company? How is technology having a role and effect on doing so? Is it helping to enrich it further and bring it to new heightened levels of value, and so on? And it is. And so it has a dramatic effect really on whether you're a data and information or analytics provider, whether you're in the tech space, and whether you're a startup or a legacy, and so many other, a commercial enterprise, for example. So all of this is really about change and the speed and velocity by which that's occurring. It's causing, again, that premise of it's not business as usual. I'm very concerned when I speak to clients that I ask them how they're doing in terms of their business strategy and where they're at today, where they're going tomorrow. When there's an underpinning of complacency, of being comfortable, it gets me a little weary, because any company that is complacent with being in the business, in the market today, is probably already falling behind the competition.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we wanted to address this. In terms of what we've done here, basically, we wanted to share best practices, methodologies, frameworks that we've been evolving through interactions with our clients, through our research agenda, to ultimately help put together a framework that business leaders could use to think about their business, the role that they play in the market that's changing today, ultimately challenge the organization to better think how to effectively bring digital services and data-based products to market more effectively. And so that's what we're going to walk through today, is that set of frameworks per se, which leads us to the how. And really, there's not going to be one size that fits all. So what you'll hear Ben and I talking about over the next half hour or so are a different range of industry examples. We'll talk about different types of companies, because there is a fundamental here that is about knowing where your organization is in the ecosystem today, in the information value chain, and how to ultimately move and evolve and really aspire to be the next type of company you want to be. So that's ultimately what we'll show you today, which will lead you on maybe two major pivots. One is at that broad company level of your strategy as a whole. Thank you, Ben. As you can see visually here on the growth framework, we've got two concentric circles. The growth framework, by which you will ultimately utilize this in a series of step functions that we're going to walk through to challenge the thinking of the type of company you are today, the type of company you could be tomorrow, the market landscape in which you're operating, and ultimately moving towards the prescription side and how you actually make those changes to people, process, or technology and data assets. While conversely, on the inner circle, which we'll talk about as the Outsell DI pedal, which is our data, information, and product lifecycle, we've refreshed this methodology that some of you have seen and been relying on and leveraging for years to bring it current again, because of those changes in the market, to thinking about the type of product and services mix, to driving different types of revenue models, the talent capability and the talent that's required to do so. And again, a role of where the organization fits through an ecosystem, whether it's through partners, whether it's through acquisition. So lots to cover today, and we'll kind of walk through both of those constructs of the frameworks today.
Perfect. And Michael, we kind of have a step-by-step process in the report, and step one of that is knowing where we are in the business value chain. So I provided just for us just an example on ag and food industry that we did here recently, so we can talk through each piece of this.
Right. Yeah, I think it's important. This is one example. We've been building these out for each of the different sectors, and again, looking at the value chain. Value chains are the way to think about businesses today and how businesses operate. We'll talk about this chart in a moment. But the basic premise being that as you think about how data flows to solve specific problems, ultimately how the money flows associated to that data, at the end of the day, it is about solving very specific business problems. And they may be functional in nature more often than others. And what we're seeing in our research is they're industry centric. So it's solving a very specific industry type of problem. And so you've got to really understand and think about the market in which you operate today with that lens. And we'll spend a few moments talking about this particular chart for digital agronomy or agriculture and the likes in a moment. Now, maybe to set the context around that, and the reason it's so kind of maybe non-traditional to the way you might be thinking about an industry value chain here. If I think back and reflect on the last year and sort of read the tea leaves on what those momentums have been of what's transpired over 2018 to kind of guide us a little bit to what 2019 will look like and beyond. I think that most would agree here that there's been some pretty substantial highlights in the market. You know, there's been a increased march to privatization, for example. We've seen huge game-changing M&A with huge numbers associated, of course, to do so. We're seeing the big trends and shifts in the consumer and in the individual that's driving through with GDPR or driving through with the way that content is consumed or shared, whether that's the likes of Plan S, whether that is through the merit. I was just reading an article this morning on PSI in Europe and this sort of movement again towards more open access and sharing of publicly available information or data to the masses. There's a lot of change here, really driven by data transparency. We've been seeing a lot of different business models evolving, challenging the thinking of a company to say, well, are we a data as a service provider and we're going to provide API models off of a platform? Or is there more money to be made by thinking about platforms that support solutions that could be built and packaged as applications and the likes thereof? So pretty dramatic in terms of 218. And we've highlighted a lot of that through the insights reports that we've provided. With that being said, it really kind of sets the tone to what 2019 is about. Ben, as you had said in the introduction, I do a lot of thinking at the end of the day of data and content enabled through technology, all infused into workflows to solving specific problems. You kind of have to break that apart a little bit. You have to think about the technology ubiquity that's occurring around all of our businesses today. Now that in part tees up why we have such a complex chart in front of you all here thinking about the value chains. You're going to see traditional data and information providers. You're going to see innovative startups that are leveraging technology like AI, like AR, VR, like blockchain, Internet of Things, so many other that are playing a role in the landscape in which you operate today. And it's also creating a bit of a level playing field, frankly. I don't think that you should be thinking about a company in the premise of, well, we're a data provider with rich data assets, and that's where we stay. But, well, there's also the technology piece, and are you going to become a technology provider in some degree? We'll come back to that. Or conversely, are you a technology company that has leveraged the network effect of having this advanced technology, whether it's in analytics or AI or other, that suddenly you're relevant in the data economy and you have a healthy data business by nature as well. So all of that is really changing because of the technology ubiquity, and it's actually leveled the playing field in part. We are seeing a lot more competition as a result, which is why this is an example chart for agriculture, looking at the whole premise of being from field to plate ultimately, and trying to identify some of the types of companies or segments, at least, for you to be thinking about and aware of, because competition is all around. It's those that you think of traditionally that you may have been competing with for years or if not decades, but it's also those that you're not thinking about. It's that sudden, uber moment that you wake up one morning and see one of our Outsell headlines. If somebody has just acquired somebody and suddenly it's very relevant, this is a new competitor in your market. So the competition is really all above, below, and all around in many ways. And we're seeing the advent of a lot more different thinking around ecosystems. So how to participate in a broader addressable market by partnering with a different range of companies. If we sort of just look for the moment as ag in this particular visual as an example, John Deere or Caterpillar, what we call the OEMs in the ag space for decades, well, they're not sitting still just providing equipment. They're developing their platforms, they're developing their digital capabilities, they're advancing their analytics to serve their clients. These are ultimately very different players than traditional data-centric providers serving the agriculture space. Seed providers to chem providers to new advances today with precision agriculture as an example. So I think you have to really think and look hard at the industry you're operating in, and rest assured we know it, that you're not operating in just one. You may be operating here in this example of agriculture, and you're also in the chem business, and you're also in, therefore, the healthcare business, or. It really is a set of diverse landscapes. To make a last point on this chart, as you see it and as you think it through and where you fit, there's an X and Y axis to consider here. Of course, when we think about the Y axis, we're thinking about the traditional data pyramid that you're familiar with, moving from foundational levels to having data, to building it to smart data through workflow up into analytics, prescriptive or predictive. On the X-axis, you have to be thinking about Again, the workflow, you have to be thinking about the value chain to solve a specific business problem. And as I mentioned in Ag's case, moving goods, for example, or creating goods at the field level all the way through supply chain, ultimately to delivery down to the plate of an individual. That's the thinking that I'm finding a lot of our companies and clients are having to think about, and think about where they play a role in it. So, and does that help a little bit on teeing up that value chain for you?
Yeah, it does. I have one question, Mike. You touched on it a little bit. We're producing these value chains, but you brought up a good point where every company in a way will have their own unique value chain depending on their competitors and the space that they play in. How can companies think about, taking an example like this and building out their own value chain and really creating the visual of the ecosystem that they play in and making sure they fit in the right way? Do you have any tips or thoughts there?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think at the end of the day, I've seen good and bad. I've seen situations where a company is sort of in its shell, thinking in the swim channel it's operated for years, leveraging some new technology because it's a shiny new toy, creating a new capability that it thinks will be well received by the market. And at the end of the day, and spending millions of dollars or pounds or euros or other, recognize that they've created some interesting tool or capability, but there's no market fit. Or conversely, they're too late to market and the competition is already there and they're up against a whole different type of play. My recommendation is to start with customer needs. Really, really inspect the customer and what the customer requirements are that you are serving today in your addressable market, and work your way from that construct first. What are the use cases that the customer is dealing with every day? What is that pain point? What is their unmet need? If you start to get under that, you can start to identify and prescribe these types of value chains, calling them out and identifying the parts and pieces to fulfill it. Because no company that I'm aware of in the world has the wherewithal to serve all of that value proposition. And second to that, if you're in the data business, you don't have all the data, of course. It's essential to solving it. So knowing what data is required to fulfill the workflow, and being able to then think through where you partner again or where you acquire to fulfill more parts of that value. So if you start with customer needs, I think you're off on a pretty good course to prescribing your value proposition and identifying that value chain that's associated.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I'm going to kick us over to step 2 here.
Yeah, so let's take a look here. As we spoke about in the introduction, there's really 2 different aperture levels to thinking about the growth framework and the work that we've been doing. The first starts here, what we've prescribed as being a 4-step process to the Outsell Growth Framework. This is really about the business that you are today. What kind of a company are you today? Are you a platform provider? Are you a software provider? Are you a data as a service provider? What are you? And really taking an unobstructed look in the mirror at yourselves to identify, to say, we are here. We have these characteristics. It's a great place to start, but again, going back to the point I made earlier about not being complacent, what kind of company do you aspire to be? What does the future look like? And so ultimately, you've got to start by addressing that current situation of the business and the aspirational goals. I would encourage, and we are seeing this actually through our study, it's become pretty well a norm in many cases of an annual recurring process to retest and validate that strategy of the company in terms of what it's doing, what it's done well, and then pivoting to what it should be doing or changing to move forward more as it progresses into the next subsequent year. So starting by that, we'll walk through each of these stages here in a moment, leading ultimately to understanding the market it's operating in, the capability that the organization has or where there's some gaps, and ultimately what to do about fulfilling those gaps, whether it's organic or inorganic, and then ultimately setting that process in place to making changes to people, process, and technology on an ongoing annual basis. When I think about these types of business imperatives and really challenging the type of business today, I've got a few examples that I can kind of think about here and share with you all. And let's maybe even tie it back to where we just were thinking about the agriculture value chain as an example. You can look at a company like Farmers Business Network as an example. Taking the premise of their business that started as a digital platform to serve farmers, to now providing much more transparency around pricing models and economics. That's a different type of buyer, not necessarily about the farmer. It's a very different type of approach to the market. That's an example of how a company would change the dynamic of the business they're in. Protect and grow the core, but look to the adjacencies that are near in order to capitalize and move forward in a slightly larger addressable market per se. We've seen a lot of that, in some of the headlines, insights you've seen on Outsell Intelligence. Corvium, is another great example, moving in from sample 6 when it first founded back in 2009, 2010 timeframe. Recognizing that food safety is an opportunity, there's a solution that goes alongside of that, really digitizing what was a very manual, paper-based workflow process in the industry, now being about aggregated food safety data and environmental monitoring of that data. That's the type of pivot we're talking about here. Okay, so start with core and pivot out to an adjacency. There's been lots of that. Digital Globe's announcement of sensing for farming back in December. Again, a similar type of play, really recognizing that there's another market to serve and an opportunity in leveraging the technology that's become available. These are the types of examples that you should be thinking about as you think about this type of pivot, I would say. Ben, do you want me to spend just maybe a few moments talking about each of these particular stages? I think that would be probably helpful for our audience, just to walk through a little bit of the construct of stage 1 through 4.
A few minutes on each would be great. Yeah, specifically, Michael, if we could, at the, maybe a few moments on each one, but stage 4 specifically, personally, I've read the report a couple times. I think that we would benefit the most spending a little bit of time and pulling on stage 4 a little bit for folks. So that'd be great.
Yeah, okay, let's do so. All right, let's start with stage 1, work our way through here. And we also recognize that every one of your companies is going to be in a different set of levels of executing on these types of steps. Some of you may already be in step 4. Some of you may be starting into step 1. Right, so it's not like the Monopoly game where all things have to start at go. Recognize that you'll intercept this accordingly. But stage 1, and again, these are methodologies to act as a checklist for you, and the detailed report that we've provided prescribes the moving parts pieces here. But at the high level, think of step 1 as defining your current business, and that's the state of as is, and then ultimately movement to the state of to be. So you've got to get underneath the business purpose and mission, of course. You've got to look at the metrics in which your company's been operating. Are you achieving those metrics? Where are you falling short? What kind of competency is needed to create and deliver value in a very unique way? That's ultimately a part of prescribing step 1. And even internally, the structure in which you operate and how you're organized to execute effectively. So stage 1 should be really thinking about that clear look in the mirror at yourself, projection to where you want to be, and ultimately creating a business concept definition as your output. Stage 2, as you progress from having that clear view, at least the early stage mock-up of it, is about analyzing the conditions and trends and the competitive posture that your company holds in the market today. So recognizing those bigger trends that are affecting you, recognizing the unmet needs that your clients have. How does that relate to the opportunity that's in the market? How much money is actually out there to be made? And how do you tap into that? Recognizing you're not alone. I don't think there's any purely greenfields in this market. There's competition affecting it in all different ways, from above, from beyond, and around. And then second to that, also, of course, thinking about how your company will have a posture in the marketplace to be unique, to be competitive for the long term. So really eyes wide open to what's going on around the organization in the markets that it's serving today.
Yeah, I've heard companies talk about it even in the way of just 2 product roadmaps, Michael, essentially having your 1 to 3 year strategic product roadmap for the entire strategic business planning process. And then underneath that, having the product roadmap to execute on that. And we can talk about that a little bit, but I've heard companies even frame it up that way.
Absolutely. It's a great way to do it. Absolutely, Ben.
And so that's a good kind of segue into the DI pedal. And before talking about this, Michael, I think it would be helpful to define product, how Outsell defines product, because I think companies define it a few different ways. So I think let's start there and then we can dive into this.
Oh, that's a great point. So I think of product in 3 different accords here. Product may be an actual tangible asset, a digital asset. We are talking about, of course, most businesses have transformed in some way, shape, or other to digital. But ultimately, what does that digital experience as a product look like to the audience being served? It may be an API call to a data set, a very profound, rich corpus of data. That's a product. It may have a software capability itself where a software service is being consumed or acquired by your client. That's also a product. Those I call maybe more as digital services, not to confuse it with professional services, but digital services that are consumable off of a platform. The tie also, of course, to professional services. Let's not forget that, because that is also a product for many companies today. It's The client need today is really about integrating said solutions or products into their environment. And so, again, you're going to see a big opportunity for global service integrators, GSIs, local providers that are implementing, helping companies implement the solutions, implement the technologies to do so. And it's also a differentiator, in my opinion, for data and information and analytic providers today. It's about talent and know-how. So how to best leverage that capability in the client environment to solve the business problem. The professional services is also part of what I would call a product. Does that sort of help in construct, Ben? Would you agree with that?
Most definitely, yeah. Thanks for that.
Absolutely. So in terms of that, whether it's a physical asset, whether it's a digital asset, whether it's a professional service, or the likes thereof through a digital service that's delivered, what companies do today and how they effectively bring those products to market really are game-changing and dramatic today. The technology that's leveraged today is really profound. And that's one of the things that we're really seeing different today. That level playing field. But how can I leverage AI? How can I leverage machine learning to ultimately take my existing product and take it to new heightened levels? Because we're under this continual pressure of commoditization of those assets. So how can I continually move that bar, keep raising or creating information value off of it? And so the use of technology, the applied talent of the individual with the know-how to solve the specific business problem is all part of ultimately accelerating a business today. It starts, therefore, with, again, a 4-sequence staging that we'll walk through from stage 1 of the design concept of something new through taking it to market by building a prototype, having that confidence that you're actually developing a solution that will solve a specific problem, understanding how it will scale, knowing where you have to do more with it, with your capability that you have as an organization in stage 3, what else has to be done to fast track bringing that to market effectively and serving the client, and then ultimately accelerating that in stage 4 by again, investing in the capabilities, having a roadmap that's prescribed to keep it on course and trajectory. Now, what we realize and recognize, and we've shared with you in the overall report, the extensive report, is this doesn't actually land on any one person's shoulders in an organization. It is about the collective of the company that has to be behind it to effectively build and bring products to the market. So we've identified, let's say, 9 different functions. Each of them plays a different role. But at the end of the day, collectively together in one social capital environment, being able to move the business forward through these stages. So let me walk you through those 4 different stages and just give a few examples of the functions and the role that the functions play. Stage 1, the design concept, is really about designing that idea. So a systematic approach to lead to the new creation of a new product, data and information and analytics-based product. You've got to, of course, have a very strong executive team on top of this as the sponsor to the imperative of why we're going to create a product, why we're going to address a certain market. The product management function, which is quite diverse, and we should probably spend a few minutes talking about product management in our call today. But building the business case, getting underneath those market conditions, the requirements to actually doing so, really bringing it to life in a plan of how it will be brought to market effectively, everything from the marketing message, the brand persona, the pricing. These are all parts of building the design concept. Looking at the data and content operations of your organization, you have the capabilities to bring this new idea to market. Is there a readiness? Or are there investments that are going to be required to fulfill the product that will be delivered? Thinking about the design, I know that we've all seen that our market is driven by the user experience, making sure it's solving the problem, easy to work with, effective in the modality that the user wants, that experience of how the user is interacting with your, per se, product. What does that require? What is that going to need in the new idea that you're bringing to market? Creating a preliminary marketing plan lands on the shoulders of the marketing team. Validating that pricing strategy that you're not going to price yourself out of market. The sales structure and the channels that you're going to bring those products to life. That's part of your sales and marketing and channel team. The talent, validating the resources that are going to be required to fulfilling and building the actual product and bringing it to market. Legal, another function, knowing how to work in the markets we're serving today. Is there legal feasibility to the product that's being created? How do we address and think about PII in the way we're going to capture, use, or reuse data? And then the finance side, of course, always often underpins everything to can we support investing in this type of product? What will the yield and return be in principle to that design concept? So I've just sort of outlined 9 different layers of functions that are all playing an instrumental role together just in stage 1, just to put together the design concept. And this holds true with those functions playing roles throughout each of the individual stages of the data and information product lifecycle. If I build upon that and maybe just reflect not necessarily role to role to role for each of these stages, let me just give a high-level orientation. So in stage 2, it's about turning that product concept, idea, and definition into an actual virtual prototype. And again, we're talking about a prototype here. You want to have agility. You don't want to go back into a dark room for a year and try to build something. It's about being agile. So building that early prototype to assess the practicality of the product you're developing, making sure that it's fulfilling that proposed concept effectively, and then ultimately refining it as you start to build upon it. So your prototype feasibility is a part of stage 2. Again, we've broken it down by function for the product management about having a very effective product roadmap described. It's about having the executive team continue to be an ambassador and an advocate to this new initiative that's underway. The design team was actually doing the heavy lift building of the prototype, the system being put in place to test it, to support it, to test it for security, to test it for accessibility, to test it for really validating all the essential parts to fulfill the product design. And then again, of course, you've got all the sales and marketing being readied to create demand generation for the product, to implement the sales plan for the sales team, start greasing the skids to the sales team to know how to position and why this per se product will be, the next value proposition brought to market and why. Again, each of those 9 functions of the organization playing a role in the first steps of making it a tangible product. Then you move on to the next stage, stage 3, which is about launching an MVP. It's really about it has to be a valued product, first of all. Let's be clear on that. I'm not so sure I like the word minimum viable product. I heard a great quote, Ben, on this once. I was talking to somebody and we were talking about MVP and they said, well, would you ever fly on a plane that's an MVP plane? I think we can all answer that pretty honestly. So at the end of the day, it's about value, and you want to have a valued product that you're bringing into market. So making sure that the mindset is in place for doing so, implementing your initial foray into the market with active learning systems. As you bring it to market, making sure the customers, whether they're first of a kind or other, are actively heard. What's the feedback? Is it fulfilling the need? Is it actually addressing the problem that it's premised to be, was positioned for? What are we hearing not just from our customers, but also from the market in the large? What are analysts saying about the product? What are competitors saying, or what are competitors doing because you brought a product to market? That's all about active learning, and you want to do so in those very early stages of launching the product. It helps you then to move into stage 4, which is really articulating a really hardly sanctioned product roadmap. Keeping that course to build, to extend it with version 1.1, 1.2, version 2, and so on. Having that vigor around all the parts that have to now be further invested in to expanding the features, the capabilities of the product you've built, making sure that it's continually addressing the changing needs of the market as it evolves. We know that it takes time to build effective products and unique data-driven products in the market. Constantly watching those signs in the market around it as you're bringing it to market, and not being per se married to the product roadmap, but committed to the product roadmap. Being able to adjust and tweak that roadmap as you go, whether it's sometimes divesting and stopping because it's not working, or whether it's double down on something because it's so effectively working. And that's that kind of mindset you have to have as you further define your stage 4 product. All of that is bound back to where we started, back in the outer circle again. Is the product that we're creating taking the business to the new place and the new persona it wants to be in the new marketplace ahead? So a lot there, and I know I've kind of rambled on in some of that in regards to the 4 stages and the functions, but really I haven't even cracked the tip of the iceberg here, as you know, Ben, looking at the report, and I hope many of you as readers in our client base have read the report. There's many different functions and steps that have to be resolved here. And that's really what this framework is about, is giving you that prescription and guideline tool to help you validate and move forward, recognizing all of those different functional roles.
Yeah, if I could just comment, Michael, on 2 things. One, we could dive in deep onto any of these stages, which the report does a good job of, but I just even want to just comment on stage 2, for example. In my world, at least, I work with a lot of small, medium-sized companies in the tech and data space. The stage that lacks the most attention is usually stage 2 in my world, where folks like to breeze over the prototyping process and get building, which results in a huge sacrifice of funds and time, and just a lot of disasters there. And so I actually just wrote, because this was happening so often, I wrote a piece on the Outsell blog called "Why Aren't People Using My Product?" But just one example of like the dive that you can do in each one of these stages and how essential it is to execute the practices accordingly. It's a really good framework. So I've been even using it in my world. So I'm excited about it. But one thing too, Michael, that I'd like to comment and discuss with you is you talked about each one of the roles, but a huge demand from our clients and our audience, and what this framework draws a massive amount of attention to is the role of product management and how important it is. Companies are struggling hiring for this role, that 3-headed hydra that can sit in the middle of all these conversations. Maybe we could spend just a few minutes talking about the research that we're doing and what we're noticing for that product management function.
Yeah, I agree 100% on that, Ben, and 2 points. So yes, there's ongoing research that we've been doing, and you'll see more published reports on the findings around the product management function and elements around it by which to say, what is product management? Where does product management fit in an organization? Is it a function? Is it a part of a business unit? Or is it its own discrete function, which actually reports up to the CEO and has an executive seat at the table? And it's actually the latter. That's what some of our findings are telling us, that the product management has to have representation at the table reporting to the CEO, because it is really about that differentiator. And this is where the rubber hits the road in terms of the money you make as an organization, is by building the right products. And it actually influences the company in terms of what the company could be or would be in the near future of the market we work in. It's an interesting point you raise about the 3-headed hydra, Ben. And I think at the construct of social capital being, you're not going to find all of the skills, like a data science. You're not going to find all of that skill set in necessarily one person. You have to rely on social capital, where there's going to be an adjunct of different skills that are brought together to ultimately fulfill the product management function. Reasons being, they have to be very good communicators. They have to be able to understand and listen to the market need, understand the customer needs. I'm not talking about product features at this level, a green button versus a red button of the product. I'm talking about what is the market need that is unfulfilled today. What could we as a company be doing to build a product to address that need. Where does that fit into the overall objectives of your company? That's a very different type of mindset than is it a green button or a red button. This is the premise that you were on, Ben, about building prototype and being so myopic about building the right prototype here. The field of dreams doesn't work. Just because we can leverage technology and take the data asset that we have and do something different with it, and it seems to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, doesn't mean that there's a market fit. Being able to start again with your customer needs and understanding the market fit, helping to drive the type of product or platform or solution you'll create. Second, of course, you have to certainly listen to your customers. You have to certainly get down to the front row seat of the users that are using your products. Yes, there you may get into more of that red button, green button scenario. What kind of feature capability is essential in the product experience? Translating the user requirements into features is also important. It's a different aperture level of that skill set. And tying all of that again back to the strategy, linking the strategy to your product execution. So you almost have the product management function like Switzerland in your organization. It has to be able to understand the inside of the company, what's effective and can be done within means. It has to understand the customer that's being served today and their requirements to stay effective to them. And it has to look broader on the horizon out to say, well, what else should we be doing with our product, our platform, our digital service, or our professional service to fulfill the next around the corner opportunity that's out there. So it really is dynamic. And so we've been doing research on the product management function, best in class, lessons learned, pitfalls to avoid, and we'll be releasing that particular research shortly as well in the next quarter or so ahead, Ben.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I would dive into that, but I want to make sure we keep an eye on time. And I think a good way to wrap this discussion, Michael, is what are the essential must-dos? If we could leave the folks that are on the call with like essential actions on how they could be thinking about this, what are a few of those that you would recommend?
Yeah, well, I think to participate and advance in the era we're working in today, there are quite a few key essentials. First, I would encourage you all to recognize where your company participates in the marketplace. Where as a specialized content provider, you play a role in industry value chains, where we started, recognizing what industries you're going to serve. Can you fulfill a value proposition and be unique in doing so to effectively translate that into a monetized and economically viable business model? Second, it's about recognizing that within that landscape, it's co-opetition more than competition in the markets we're serving today and seeing today. I think you've got to step back a little bit, even though you may have years or decades of fierce competition, you should stare at that a little different and say, okay, well, how can we participate more effectively to address more of the market by working together with sometimes some of your past competitors, or conversely, those that are in that value chain. We started with ag, we talk about the OEMs as an example. Maybe that's the next partnering that's going to help to substantiate the role of the organization. So getting under the ecosystem, being able to establish a partner program that is healthy and vibrant, and continuing that momentum. I would third, look to the type of business that you are today. Tools, workflow platforms, content. What are you in solving the specific business problem that your industry faces? Really inspect that and be clear on it. And then the last point I would maybe suggest is to think about the tooling and technology that's available. There's a lot that can be done to take your existing assets and capabilities, bring them to new enriched heightened levels, again, to play a role in the products and service you'll bring to market in the future. So thinking and getting ahead of technology, not just because it's a shiny new toy, but because it adds a value, and whether it's using AI or machine learning or analytics or other, to really enrich your value proposition to create new value for your clients.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Michael. A few things, and then I want to open it up for Q&A. We'll be sending this chart that I just pulled up on screen. This is the roles and the stages that Michael was discussing on the call. Feel free, don't strain your eyes trying to look at this. We will send this to you so you have a copy. But it's a great kind of cheat sheet to have on your desk to look through each stage and again, the roles and the process that they play. These are all broken down into a lot of detail in the report itself. So this kind of gives you the high level view, but the report gives a massive amount of detail as well. Also, again, we're recording this, so we'll send the recording as well as this video. And to access the report, you can access it on our website. And before we do Q&A, Michael and I are here to help. So if you'd like to get in touch with us, please reach out. You can find us on the Outsell website or reach out to the general contact us on the website. We'd love to support you with this process and make sure that you're successful. There's a Q&A function on the webinar, so please feel free to use it. And again, if you have questions afterwards, please feel free to reach out to us directly, and we'd love to help. So just open up for any questions that you may have. And one of two things will happen here, Michael. Either people will have no questions or have questions, or the Q&A function wasn't turned on. So we'll give it a minute and see what happens.
Right. Well, one of the things, Ben, on that, it sort of substantiates why we also put this investment into building this growth framework and the research and the details that go behind supporting it. We've seen a huge increase in business executives that are asking these types of questions, trying to understand where to take that next step in the organization, what's the big bet they should be placing. It really is about having a qualified and quantified point of view on the markets and what's happening around them, having that wide open viewpoint to understand that conditions have changed, and seeking that guidance from outside of the hallways of the business to what we would recommend to them as being steps to take to be more effective and accelerate their business. So we have seen a tremendous increase in that, asking that bigger set of questions to the company direction and strategy, thinking about the types of adjacent markets, for example. We get a lot of those questions. Expecting an organization, knowing where it fits in the value chain, and then where there's a logical adjacency that can open and extend the TAM, the total addressable market for the business, extend that envelope. So those are the types of questions we've been getting a lot of. And then within the construct of the DI pedal, again, about the types of products to build, the user experiences, the business models to be most effective, pricing structures that are again, going to be effective in the market. Those are the types of questions we've been hearing a lot of from our clients.
Great. We'll give it one more moment, see if anybody has any questions. Again, could be that this isn't working, but it appears to be open.
And we'll certainly, as you said, Ben, take any questions that you have after on email or other, reach out to your contacts and Ben and I, and we'll make sure to have these specific discussions within your business, within your industry. There's going to be more value chains that our team, the research team, analyst team will be producing. So we've already got a number of those value chains published today. There's more to come on those. And don't feel to hesitate to reach out to us so that we can be of assistance in that.
Perfect. Well, Michael, I want to thank you for the time and thank everybody that joined us. Always a really fun discussion. Again, like Michael said, please reach out. We're here to help. And you'll see a lot of research and assets coming out from us related to this growth framework. Again, it's really the backbone of a lot of the work we're doing here. So please reach out if you have any questions. And thank you, everybody, for your time. We'll follow up with the visual as well as the video so you have it on hand for you and your team. So thank you very much, and hope you all have a fantastic day wherever you are in the world.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for the opportunity. Enjoy the day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Michael.
You got it. Bye-bye.